This session has been put together for you by CNV International and the German Partnership on Sustainable Textiles and Fair Wear. My name is Dr. Jennifer Zirk, and it is my great pleasure and privilege to be your moderator for this session. For those of you who don't know me, I work as a legal consultant for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I've been working on the OHCHR's Accountability and Remedy Project since its inception in 2014. And I work very closely with Ben Shea, whom I'm sure many of you will know or at least heard of. Ben manages that piece of work within the OHCHR, but unfortunately was not able to be with us today. So thank you all for joining us. I'm told that we have more than 300 people registered for this session and dialing in from many parts of the world. So that is absolutely excellent and really highlights the level of interest and the importance and timeliness of this meeting. And we are all looking forward to a really good discussion. Just a few quick housekeeping pointers before we start. This is a 2-hour session. We will be all together for the first hour when you'll be hearing from a number of speakers whom I will introduce shortly. Then in approximately 1 hour's time, we'll be heading out into some breakout groups where we'll be having a few more, some more focused discussion about the benefits of worker-driven approaches and some of the practicalities. We will then be back together for the last 25 minutes or so for a wrap-up and for some closing reflections. All the usual rules of etiquette apply. Please do keep yourself on mute when not speaking. It would be nice if you could keep your videos on if at all possible. I'm sure our speakers would love to see you. When we get to the discussion parts, you can make use of the raise hand function if you want to speak. You can also place questions in the chat box. We may not get to all of them in the first hour because of the number of speakers we have, but you can you can make a note of the questions, any questions and comments you have, and you can bring them to the breakout groups as well. And please note finally that this session is being recorded. Right, before we get stuck in, I just wanted to offer a few quick reflections from the work that I've been doing just to help contextualize this session before we get stuck in. The point I really wanted to start with is that meaningful engagement with affected people and groups is absolutely fundamental to having a grievance mechanism that is going to be used and trusted. The reasons for this, I think, will be obvious, I think, to everybody on this call. People with lived experience of the challenges that grievance mechanisms are meant to address and the reasons why seeking remedy is so difficult, if not impossible in many cases, are the real experts in this field. When Ben Shea and I were working on the 3rd phase of the Accountability and Remedy project, we were struck by how abstract and technocratic many mechanisms seemed, even though they may have been developed with the best of intentions. Some were very legalistic. Some looked like they had been cut and pasted from somewhere else. Some were unbelievably complex procedurally, and quite a few did not seem to recognize or provide any particular role for trade unions, which is a problem for the kinds of mechanisms that we're discussing today, supply chain grievance mechanisms. However, we are starting to see some very welcome developments with the rise of methodologies such as user-centered institutional design, worker-led approaches, and we're going to be hearing from speakers in this session about how unions have collaborated very effectively with each other and with civil society organizations to try to address very serious gaps in accountability and remedy systems. And speaking of which, I just wanted to flag the excellent and very inspiring session on worker-led mechanisms that took place during the UN Forum. This session explored the origins and developments of the Fair Food Program in the US and how this model is being replicated in other places. If you didn't manage to see it, you can watch it again. I would urge anyone interested in worker-driven mechanisms to take a look at that discussion. And I'm hoping a link will appear in the chat. We're also seeing supply chain grievance mechanisms being developed in such a way that take far greater stock of the remedy ecosystem that is there, looking for ways to leverage and strengthen existing possibilities rather than constantly reinventing the wheel. And in guidance offered at the end of the third phase of the Accountability and Remedy Project, OHCHR makes a number of comments about the need for much better coordination and cooperation, including between actors in supply chains on remedy for human rights related harms. So with those opening thoughts, I would now like to hand over to the people who have worked so hard to put this session together for us, for them to provide their own scene setting remarks. I'd like to go over to the Fairware and PST team first, who I think is going to be represented here, yes, by Valentine Wolfram. Hello. Hi. Now, Valentine, hello. You are the grievance mechanism coordinator for Fairware. I was hoping you could just kick us off by telling us a bit about the background for why you put this session together and the kinds of issues and trends that you're seeing that we really need to bear in mind in our discussion today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and thank you for this great introduction. Welcome to our audience as well. Thanks for being with us this morning. We're very happy that you are starting this Monday with us. So yeah, before we dive into our discussion, I wanted to take a moment to give a bit of context as to why the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, CNV International, and Fairware, we decided to organize this side session today. So you mentioned it, Jennifer, our topic today is about making supply chains grievance mechanism inclusive. And I think that a question which at its core touches on engagement, meaningful engagement, and collaboration as well to ensure that grievance mechanisms are effective for the people whose use these mechanisms are intended to. So when I think of engagement and collaboration, I think of two important aspects, which are both very timely and also need to be considered with care to provide effective grievance mechanisms. The first one is collaborations between operators of supply chains grievance mechanisms, something that the report on the Accountability and Remedy Project, which just mentioned, Jennifer, tells us is very necessary to ensure coherence and efficiencies as well. So why is this timely? Because in the textile and garment sector, we see already a number of supply chain grievance mechanisms existing. Some are operated by multi-stakeholder initiatives such as Fairware, other collaborative initiatives, or perhaps also companies themselves. And in fact, we see this trend now being accelerated with legislative developments requiring companies to provide these mechanisms in their supply chains. The risk that we see here with these different mechanisms functioning separately from each other is a risk of duplication of efforts, but also a risk of confusion, and mainly for the rights holders, the workers, which are the main target group for these mechanisms. Confusion as to what system to use for what and how, and this can lead to inefficiencies and barriers, of course, to access to remedy. So Fairware and the Partnership for Sustainable Textile, we've taken this as a strong signal to collaborate more together. And of course, also with other multi-stakeholders initiative, we share expertise, we share best practices, and we try to find alignment on our approaches to provide more coherence, more effective mechanisms for the rights holders. We continue to take steps in this direction, and we have ambitions to have this more coordinated approach to systems of remedy. And why I mention it here and why I think it's relevant for our discussion is because central to this work of harmonization alignment is to take this multi-stakeholder approach, but really keeping the workers the main target groups of grievance mechanism at its core. So I come to my second point related to engagement and collaboration here, and the main topic of our session today, which is engaging and collaborating towards that with the workers and the legitimate representatives, the stakeholders who may represent workers' voices. Again, why is this critical? Because the Accountability and Remedy Project here again tells us what lies at the heart of effective grievance mechanism is making sure that the needs, the perspective of the people for whose use these mechanisms are intended. So in other words, that the voices of the rights holders are heard. And in addition, engagement and this collaboration can really strengthen a complementary approach between supply chain grievance mechanism on the one hand and local systems, improve an overall access to remedy. Bearing in mind, I think it's important to remind the audience here that grievance mechanisms like the one provided by Fairware, for example, are not intended to replace or undermine existing functional systems, but rather to act as a safety net. And so there is a real potential to act in complementarity here, tap into each system's strengths to support better access to remedy for workers. So what I want to impart on the audience before we dive into our conversation is that engagement and collaboration is very timely, and it needs to be considered carefully to drive effectiveness. So first one, as we saw, is this collaboration between operators of supply chain grievance mechanism, multi-stakeholders initiative to find this coherence, to find this alignment. And second, and I think that indeed it is central to informing this process of harmonization, of alignment, is engagement, collaboration with workers, with their legitimate representatives to ensure that supply chain grievance mechanism responds to workers' needs, to their perspective, and work in complementarity as well to strengthen access to remedy for workers. So it's very much with this in mind that we wanted to organize this side session today with the Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, CNV International, and Fairware, and give a space for our panel, our audience, to share what are the opportunities, what may be the challenges as well for engaging, collaborating with workers, their representatives, and see what we can learn from this and build on to ensure that supply chain grievance mechanisms remain inclusive for workers, they remain purposeful and effective. So I will stop here. I'll pass on to my colleague, Suzanne, as well from CNV International, to provide a bit of background from her side. And I very much look forward to our discussions today. I hope that you will find it interesting and enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Valentine. You've raised so many interesting structural and important structural points, and the picture is indeed becoming very complex. So it is important, very important, to reflect on the implications of that from an access to remedy point of view. Right, Suzanne Cornelissen, I'm going to hand over to her in a moment. Suzanne, your organization has been working for decades with independent trade unions in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia with a view to improving local working conditions for people. And you have done a lot of work in the garment sector, and you've recently conducted a study, I believe, on responsiveness of supply chain grievance mechanisms in local contexts. And I think you uncovered a number of problems. So we're looking forward to hearing a bit more about your research and what you've found out.
Yes, thank you. Also, good morning from my side. I'm very happy to see so many participants. I think we're at 213 at the moment. So yeah, I'm really glad there's so much interest. Thanks for the introduction. Just shortly, CNV International is a Dutch labor union. We work internationally supporting local labor unions in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. In Asia, we're working in the textile sector and palm oil sector, so supporting unions in both of these supply chains. Like you rightly mentioned, we conducted a scoping study last year because as CNV International, we're often being asked the question what a more ideal grievance mechanism could look like. For instance, in relation to the follow-up of the Dutch textile agreement, but also in relation to upcoming due diligence legislation. And there are so many grievance mechanisms in place in the garment sector. Different multi-stakeholder initiatives have them, company grievance mechanisms, and also governmental ones. And they all operate differently and they have different steps and procedures. Yet what they do have in common that they are quite often inaccessible to workers. They're very lengthy, often complicated, and also costly. And the turnaround can take several years sometimes, depending on the complaint's complexity and the receiver's capacity and efficiency. And actually many grievances will actually never become a formal complaint. because it just takes so much effort. And I'm sure that one of the speakers in our panel, Emma Vogt from CCC, will be speaking on this in the panel and being able to address some of the examples. So I'm looking forward to hear. So we therefore initiated a scoping study last year, which would provide us with a broad overview of the mechanisms out there, their differences and similarities, how they have been used, by whom, and what kind of outcomes they led to. But we also raised the question among the local unions with whom we work, what are workers and local labor unions looking for them to be able to solve grievances on the ground? What are the obstacles? When do they turn to international grievance mechanisms? And what do they find important in terms of making these mechanisms more accessible? And one of the outcomes was that it was most important for workers on the ground to have a fast solution or outcome. So not a very lengthy, complicated process. And what we heard from local labor unions that we work with, and one of our other panelists, Ms. Ellie Rosita, will also discuss this shortly in the panel, is that the main obstacle really for labor unions is to be able to do their work effectively on the ground. And this is really where they also can use more support from international brands and multi-stakeholder initiatives, for instance, because in the end, it is most ideal for grievances to be solved locally through social dialogue. Yet the work of unions and the level of freedom of association in many Asian countries is a real challenge. But here there's really a lot of room for brands to support. So concluding, I'm happy we're having this discussion with each other here today. And I think like my colleague from Fairware Foundation, Valentine, already indicated, it's very timely. So I hope we can provide some meaningful input also to the accountability and remedy project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I agree. It's a very timely discussion. The prospect that a grievance could take years to resolve through these kinds of processes is so depressing, and suggests that these kinds of mechanisms are not yet living up to the promise highlighted in the UN Guiding Principles, and there's a lot of work to do. Okay, so what needs to be done? We are now going to hear from 3 expert speakers who are going to elaborate on some of the themes that have been already raised by Valentine and Suzanne, and to share some insights that will help to build our understanding of what is meaningful stakeholder engagement, what forms can this take, what conditions have to be there for there to be meaningful engagement, what kinds of things will enhance and what kinds of things could potentially undermine efforts to make supply chain grievance mechanisms more inclusive, what solutions have been found to help overcome obstacles, and what kinds of features will a worker inclusive supply chain grievance mechanism have, and what might be missing at the moment. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you all Ellie Rosita. Ellie is president of the Indonesian Trade Union Confederation, KSBSI. It's wonderful to have you with us. We have Emma Vogt, who is the Urgent Appeals Coordinator at the Clean Clothes Campaign. Hello, very warm welcome to you. And Joris. Hello, Joris Oldenziel. Hello, nice to see you. A great friend to many remedy-related projects, including the Accountability and Remedy Project, and we're really looking forward to hearing from you as well. Now, although this can be a little bit tricky in an online format, I'm going to try and run this as a conversation between our experts. So we're going to try and have a nice to and fro. So I'm asking for nice, brief and punchy answers to the questions that I'm posing, and I'm going to keep a close eye on the clock to try to make sure that we don't run over. If there's time, we might try and weave in some questions coming in from the audience. We'll see how we go. But I wanted to start with Ellie first. Ellie, hello, hi.
Hi.
Ellie's calling in from Indonesia. Ellie, can you please give us a sense of what kinds of complaints and grievances people have in the garment sector? What kinds of issues would workers like to raise if they could?
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone over there. I cannot mention name by name, but I know and I see you in front of me right now. According to your question, sorry with my English is not really fluent, but I try my best. The labor-intensive industrial sector, such as textiles, garments, footwear, has begun to be affected by a reduction in orders of up to 50%. This is according to the employers in Indonesia. Several companies have made layoffs, and according to data available at the Ministry of Manpower, September 2022, as many as 10.765 workers have been laid off. There will be more in number if counted until January 2023. The wars between Russia and Ukraine, the issue of the globalization also threaten the future of the workers here in Indonesia. Although we know that it doesn't really affect Indonesia as much as pandemic COVID-19. For this reason, three groups of employers, the Indonesian Employer Association, the Indonesian Textile Association, and the Indonesian Footwear Association submitted their proposal to the government regarding the term of no work, no pay. This is only for garment and footwear. Employers can enforce working hours of at least 30 hours a week instead of 40 hours according to law to reduce the number of layoffs so that there is flexibility. Whereas state does not recognize the term of it. Even if there is policy of flexibility in working hours and wages, it must be based on bipartite agreement between employers and workers. The existence of no work, no pay can legalize effort to lay off workers without the payment of wages. The same issues as in previous years, as you mentioned, and have not resolved until now, are wages and job security. The new law has also removed the existing sectoral wages, and the sectoral wages is higher than the minimum wage. So our government right now eliminated it, and then the government wage will be under minimum wage. And in government itself applied wages below the minimum wage, also another type of wage we call ideal wages. So employer will call the workers to agree even though lower than minimum wage. The struggles of labor unions in supporting those workers, the trade union, we understand, is not only fight for workers' rights and protect them. Trade union also has role as a bridge between company and workers. Trade union maintains good relation with companies. We advocate them to know how to solve the problem throughout social dialogue before bringing the case to industrial relation dispute or to bring the case to international or global level. We discussed the reason for rejecting some of the articles in the Omnibus Law. Maybe you ever heard about the Omnibus Law or the new replacement Omnibus Law, government regulation in lieu of law, we call Perpu. And what do we have to do? Is we need dialogue, lobbying, strike, or bringing case to the Constitutional Court, or we bring the case to International Labor Conference. So everything will be discussed. And first step, we have the social dialogue with the stakeholder. We assist also them to make compliant to a higher level. For instance, to Clean Clothes Campaign, industrial, I2C, brands, Fairwear, CNP, or other partner international when we didn't find a solution. However, we seldom report the cases internationally because it will take quite a long time. We'll do investigation and two-way communication with the disputing parties. We had experience on it even almost 5 years, but we didn't find anything or we didn't find answer. Language also is a problem for the workers, especially in garment here in Indonesia, how to write the chronology and compliance mechanism. We don't have it. During negotiation or complaint to the company, we also ask the workers to record or write down if they arrive between company and workers into an agreement. We suggested them to put on collective agreement, so they will look into it when there is a denial between them. That is right now. But if you're asking me to directly to say about what we need from international, can I say directly right now? Yes,
yes, but perhaps, yeah, I do want to ask you about that. I wonder if we could come back to, I have a number of forward-looking questions at the end, and I wonder if we could come back to that right at the end. But so hold that thought, because I want to now go to Emma. I just before we do, I just wanted to say thank you for that. It's the comments that you make are so important, because I find discussions about grievance mechanisms can also quickly become quite abstract. So it's really important for you for these reminders about, you know, what this is actually for, and also for giving us a sense of, you know, what some global issues like the pandemic are having, what kind of effect they're having, and particularly what trade unions can offer. We'll certainly come back to that point. So Emma, can I just go to you? I'd be interested to hear a bit more, and I'm sure we all would, about the urgent appeals system that you've created. If you can tell us a bit about how it works, how it relates to grievances at factory level, and also, can you give us a sense of, are there some particular types of complaints that tend not to get resolved at factory level that need to be escalated up? Are there particular types of complaints that go one way or the other?
Sure, thanks, and thanks again to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak at this panel. So Clean Clothes Campaign brings together over 230 member organizations from across the globe, and that includes also trade unions and labor rights organizations. And urgent appeals is our name for requests that come in mostly from members of our network, to support with addressing labor rights violations that workers have encountered at their workplace. So if our network decides that a case can be taken up as an urgent appeal case, then we bring together people from the network that have experience in addressing the particular type of labor rights violation, that are knowledgeable about the country where the violation was reported, people that are based in the countries where the relevant brands are also based, so they can directly reach out to brands. And in that group, what we call a case group that develops a strategy to address the case, we also always include the reporting organization that brought the case to the network, and they are always in direct contact with the workers. So in that sense, the workers and the reporting organization have a very direct link to the development of the case strategy and also the implementation of that strategy later on. And you were asking about issues that tend to actually reach us as urgent appeals because they were not addressed at the factory level. So looking at our current active cases, I can say that the most recurring issues are freedom of association related violations and severance payment. Well, lack of severance payment, obviously. So it's good to note that freedom of association cases rarely start as freedom of association cases. They start with workers observing something in their factory that they would like to change, that they would like to address. Then they decide that they want to work on that with other people. They decide to organize into a union. And at that point, they actually face repression at the factory. They face discrimination. They might face forced dismissal. So it's good to also keep in mind that that always starts with other issues that workers are actually trying to address also at the factory level. And severance cases were especially coming in big amounts to the CCC network during and after the COVID-19 lockdown period, when a lot of factories had to close or had to dismiss a number of people. And if you look at especially the cases where the factory is really closed, then clearly it's hard to know where workers can go. The door is literally shut. So that is also a difficult issue for workers to get justice locally. And then, yeah, we often try to actually get the former buyers of closed factories to take action on that as well and get involved in ensuring the payment to the workers.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Emma. That was very interesting. Some really important insights there about how issues can start with one problem and then quickly snowball and become, you know, more complex and challenging. And you also have introduced issues around safeguarding as well and safety, which we might be interesting to pick up as well when we start to delve into the practicalities. Joris, hello there. Thank you for your patience. I wonder if you'd like to reflect on make any further observations about anything you've heard so far from Ellie and Emma. Also, I'm sure that those of us who are not familiar with Accord would like to hear a little bit from you about how it works and what its structure is and how it engages with local organizations, local worker organizations, and also any advice from the experience of that mechanism about what works well and what not so well would be very valuable to this discussion too, I think.
Thanks, Jennifer, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks a lot for asking us to participate in this panel. Maybe indeed, I'll give you a very short overview of the Accord for those of you who are not fully familiar with what the Accord is. So we started in 2013 after the Rana Plaza building collapse in Bangladesh as the Bangladesh Accord, which was renewed after 5 years in 2018. And in 2021, in September, was renamed as the International Accord on Health and Safety in the Textile and Garment Industry. The work in Bangladesh is continuing, but it is now being operated and implemented by the RMG Sustainability Council. This is a tripartite independent organization that's been set up in June 2020 and has taken over all of the work of the Accord. So the Accord brands that sign the International Accord still have their commitments and their obligations, but in Bangladesh, they are being implemented through this organization, RSC. And so that also includes the grievance mechanism, the local OSH complaints mechanism that was set up over there. We have now more than 180 brands and retailers from all over the world that have signed the International Accord. And as some of you may know, we have recently decided to expand the work to Pakistan. And we now have more than 30 brands that have signed also the Pakistan Accord. And we're in the process of establishing our program over there as well. As it relates to the involvement of workers and worker representatives, I think a couple of things are really important to note. And one of them is the principle that's also part of the UN guiding principles, which is that those for whom the initiative is intended should be part of the governance and the design of the mechanism and the initiative. And that is indeed also what happened at the Accord. So when the OSH complaint mechanism was developed, we set up a working group, including representatives from the brands, but also representatives from the trade unions and from NGOs, to really design the whole complaints mechanism to make sure that that everyone is content with how it's been set up and how it's operating. So that is a key principle in terms of involving local stakeholders and worker representatives. They are also very much involved in the actual implementation of the OSH complaints mechanism, because the complaints mechanism is open to workers directly. So many workers actually file complaints themselves, but also worker representatives. So there are also a fair number of complaints where the worker representatives, on behalf of a group of workers or one worker in a particular factory, files the complaint with the Accord and now RSC OSH complaints mechanism. You were asking also about the challenges. One of the key challenges for us is that our mechanism focuses only on occupational health and safety. So it is much broader than fire and building safety. So it's important to note that because we also cover, for example, excessive working hours, workplace violence, sexual harassment, maternity pay, maternity cover. So it's everything that's related to occupational health and safety, but it's still just focused on occupational health and safety, which is not necessarily, of course, always the core concern of worker representatives and trade unions. So there are also a lot, I think about 70% of the cases that are being received that we don't have the mandate to deal with, and that are therefore forwarded to the brands to see if they can help resolve it. So those are the non-OSH complaints. So these are some of the key challenges. And if we talk about replicating this or collaborating with other initiatives, it's important to note that the Accord has a couple of key principles that would need to be incorporated in any other work that we do with other mechanisms. So the first, of course, the most logical expansion would be for the Accord and the RSC to expand beyond OSH to also cover non-OSH issues. But if there's collaboration with other initiatives, then it is important to note that the Accord is a legally binding agreement. And that gives the teeth to the OSH complaints mechanism that makes it so effective. Fortunately, we hardly ever have to bite, but we sometimes do have to show the teeth because the factory management is obligated to implement any outcomes and determinations that are coming out of the investigation of the complaints team. And if they don't do that, then they may risk losing the business from the brands because the complaints mechanism can compel the brands to terminate their business relationships if the factory management don't cooperate. So this is a really important key principle, which is used really as an incentive for the factory management to cooperate. And as a result, we've been quite successful in resolving cases, including, for example, reinstatement of workers who were unfairly dismissed, issues around fire and building safety, of course, that needed to be part of the corrective action plan, and many other types of remedies. So it is really, I think, quite an effective mechanism for remedy. And then there's one more point that I really wanted to stress here, which is the issue of awareness raising. We have seen that the Accord's uptake of the complaints mechanism really was in par with the all employee meetings that we organized in all of the factories that were covered under the Accord. So we, in total, have been covering around 1,600 factories in Bangladesh. And we've organized all employee meetings in all of these factories, which means that we have now reached out to more than 2 million workers. And they all received a booklet with very easy to understand pictures and language and a phone number that they can call if they have an issue or a concern. And we've seen that the uptake of and therefore the awareness of the existence of the mechanism has really grown exponentially as we rolled out these all employee meetings. So if there's any other sort of expansion or collaboration between multi-stakeholder initiatives or other grievance mechanisms, the awareness raising directly to the workers and thereby also building the trust amongst the workers is very key. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. I will come back to. I think we might come back to the point you made about replicability in other sectors, because that's a particularly interesting one. You mentioned about the mechanism having teeth, and I'm sure that people working in other sectors would like to see a lot more mechanisms with teeth. So we might come back to that point towards the end. I just wanted to. Emma's raised the point about a lot of issues and sort of starting out as one thing and then ending up as raising issues about fundamental problems to do with freedom of association. And a question's come up in the chat about how this works in countries where the rights of freedom of association are not recognized or So the question I wanted to ask is, how do worker-driven approaches work in countries where the right of freedom of association is very restricted or not recognized? I'm going to start with Ellie, if that's okay. Ellie, do you want me to repeat the question, or is that clear enough? It's a question about freedom of association. How, in countries where this right is not recognized, is it possible to develop worker-driven approaches? What problems arise and how can they be overcome?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. In Indonesia, we have, of course, the freedom association also still problem, but not really number one, because we can show that freedom association is everywhere. That's why you can see 16 confederation right now. We have like 117 federation national level, and we have 1,000 in factory level. And the problem is sometimes also there are yellow union using by employer. And how we can implement the freedom association in the country who fully restricted it, because they can show about the convention, and also workers should try to explain and socialize and also make campaign to the people, because I understand we mention everything as an example. They can mention another country who already support for the convention. The other country also will slowly will accept it. But sometimes employer will refuse the freedom of association because they only see the strike and also against demand everything without any solution or giving them idea, because the existence of the workers organization is not only demand, but how you protect the workers and also automatically maintains the sustainability of the business, because we want business there, because the workers also get the money from there. So it will be together cooperation. I think the capacity to have a very good social dialogue. What is the benefit? Why you create the workers organization in the factory? What is the benefit the factory? Because the factory will refuse everything we show to them. If we only show the anger, there is no solution. There is no like offering the collaboration with them. But at least we can show them what is already succeed by the workers organization. I think it's also like that. And of course, we need the collaboration. First, collaboration will be with the management, and also don't try to persuade the workers on for reject against the employer, but show them very good attitude and tell them the law, the regulation, which one should be fight for, which one also to be win-win solution. What is the meaning of the social dialogue? How you can go to an agreement? So I think, yeah, of course, not really easy, but at least trade union side should be so the very good one first before you refuse. But if employer refuse you as to establish the freedom association, then you can go to strike. But at least one by one, show them through social dialogue and also collaboration, and tell them about the good thing they can do by trade union.
Yes, that's a good point. Try and change the conversation. Emma, would you like to reflect on what Ellie's just said about those points? I would be interested in your take.
Yeah, if I can just add on to the thought of how the national standards for freedom of association are relevant here versus other expectations on an international level. I think it's also important to recognize that we can always try to raise the bar beyond what is nationally the minimum standard. And I think we also see increasing recognition from brands about how important it is that workers are able to organize at factory level, because it also helps them to actually identify the issues that are most urgent to workers. If there is an environment in which workers feel comfortable raising those issues and are able to work in a union together on those issues. And I think we'll get more into this also in the breakout session later, but I think it's good to highlight now also that we at Clean Clothes Campaign are also advocating for brands to sign up to a binding agreement, the Pay Your Workers Respect Labor Rights Agreement. And in that, we are also asking brands to make a commitment to a mechanism that protects the freedom of association rights of workers across their supply chain. But it is definitely challenging that the contexts are different in different countries. Also, if you consider, for example, that the complaint mechanism of Fair Wear Foundation never publishes about the issues that are raised by workers in China, for probably good reason, but that is an issue when you consider the importance of transparency, of predictability for workers. So it's, we are having to actually balance different interests in situations like that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to come back to Ellie about in just a moment about what international brands should be doing, because you've both raised that we have to talk about their role. Can I just check in with Joris? Joris, did you want to add anything to that onto that freedom of association discussion before I go back to Ellie?
Well, only thing that I wanted to say is that, of course, it's not really an issue of no trade unions being allowed in Bangladesh, but the fact is that there are very few factories where there is a factory level trade union. So that's why it is also important that the mechanism is directly available to workers themselves that can file complaints individually or as a group. And the International Accord has a paragraph that wherein the brands and the trade unions collectively commit to promoting the right to freedom of association in accordance with the ILO standards. So there is that. So for us, it's important that that workers can access the mechanism directly. But also at the federation level, federations can also play a role in supporting workers in factories where there are no trade unions. And we also have workers who are solidarity members of some of the federations, and through that can ask for the support of the federations.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you. Okay, so Ellie, can you pick up this point about international brands, what they should be doing, and give us some thoughts about that?
Yes, since long time, our confederation and organization already engaged with the partner in international, especially with CNV, WSM, ACP, and many things. And also we affiliated to ITUC. And of course, many times we share the issue, but sometimes we stop that. We don't want to bring the issue to international level because the time, the strict time. We want the answer very soon, but everything we solve, even though sometimes we lost and sometimes we win. There are many initiatives and calls were created at the global level, but the implementation was not as beautiful as agreed. Maybe because was not binding. There was no monitoring and evaluation. How far did it go? Is there any change? And what is the percentage of compliance? So maybe the company doesn't want to to obey it because there is no monitoring and evaluation. We understand that the OECD guideline recommends that business assess whether their purchasing practices contributed to harm, implementing prevention to avoid harm, and develop management procedure that purchasing departments should follow to reduce of loss. Nothing could turn out better except in company without the intervention of the government and those initiatives. There are laws, but even then they are not enforced and workers are afraid to sue because they will be asked to make a choice, comply with company rules or lay off. However, brand has great power to make them comply than law itself. And also international support behind us also will be see like a weapon for the workers union, workers organization. We want the brands prohibit unfair practices by prohibiting suppliers from engaging in unfair practices. Please put the requirements onto your agreement when you make your purchase agreement. Then this must also be socialized through seminars, campaigns, training, published and implemented and applies throughout the global supply chains. As happened in Europe, propose a law that requires all brands and retailers who sell their product to conduct due diligence on living wages throughout the global supply chain. Hopefully the countries that produce garments will also do the same. I'm offering a problems resolution mechanism because we has experience during freedom of association protocol with the establishment of problem-solving committees at the company level, national and international level, such as example in the FOA protocol. In factory level consists of management and worker representative. Without the appeal of the management, we will not have a solution because what happened, only workers and management knows about it. So the key person, the actor should be solving the problem. It will be workers and also management inside the company. The duration of problem resolution also needs as a requirement. There needs a social dialogue, collaboration, collective initiatives, partnership for lobbying and advocacy as prevention before something happens inside the company. However, the implementation at the company level is the most important of all initiatives undertaken. If there is no willingness from company to respect of human rights, everything we do will be useless. So that is from me right now, but we thank you for all the initiative. However, we can show it to the company, not like threat, but hey, you know, buyer also knows our problem. So let us together, sitting together, have a good dialogue to solving this problem. Instead, we bring the case to international level.
Thank you so very much. You raised a number of really interesting points about bindingness and contracting, which are now finding their way into new legal proposals relating to mandatory human rights due diligence. So there's a lot of things coming together at the moment, and I wondered if I could just would you like the last word, Joris, on this particular point about bindingness? You raised the point of, we were talking about the importance earlier of things having teeth, and do you see prospects for more binding regimes in other sectors, perhaps fueled by some of these new legal proposals that we're seeing? Do you want to just sort of get out your crystal ball and tell us what you think is coming next?
Well, it may be important to make a distinction between binding in terms of legislation and the binding nature of the accord, because the accord is a contract which is voluntarily signed by both parties, which is on the one hand the global trade unions, industrial and uni-global union, and on the other hand individual brands and retailers. So the accord is actually not one accord but 180 accords, because each individual company signs this contract with the trade unions, and the legally binding nature is is such that there is the opportunity to resolve issues between the two parties through binding arbitration. And so we have seen in the past that in 2 cases, the unions filed complaints against brands, and this went to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague and ended up in settlements. But the legally binding nature has also helped us implement the program very consistently across all the different signatories. So it was also very helpful to have very clear objectives and a very clear policies and procedures. So that is one thing. And I think these kind of binding agreements between parties, private parties, could definitely be replicated in other countries and in other sectors. I don't see a reason why not. But that's, of course, for the parties to decide amongst themselves. Then separately, we, of course, have now a lot of developments regarding mandatory due diligence. We have the law already coming up or already being started in Germany. There's discussions in the Netherlands. There's obviously the EU mandatory due diligence coming up. And we already see that a lot of brands are anticipating that will happen and are already looking into their supply chains to see how to ensure compliance. And participating in an initiative like the Accord can help them in their compliance. So I think initiatives like the Accord could also be helpful for making sure that brands comply with that legislation. But it is clear that that development towards due diligence, human rights due diligence becoming more and more mandatory is inevitable and will increasingly be seen at national level as well as a multilateral level.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really important context. Okay, well, that was an absolutely fascinating discussion about which I think will be a really good preparation for the deep dives we're going to have in the next breakout sessions. I do want to acknowledge some really interesting points coming through the chat about things like accessibility of mechanisms to migrant workers, about how worker voice systems can empower workers, about how you get much better buy-in from the companies involved. But I suggest that we park those for now and explore them in the breakout sessions, but please don't forget them. Before we move on to the breakout sessions, I just want to turn now to someone who I think will be very well known to many of you to offer his closing reflections for this part. Mr. Rainer Hoffmann was president of the German Trade Union Federation between May 2022 and May 2024, and in September of last year took on a new role as the SDG ambassador for the Development Ministry on Decent Work. So Rainer, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Can I now turn to you for some thoughts about some reflections on what we've heard so far?
Yes, thanks very much, Jennifer, dear colleagues, dear friends. I think it was an extremely fruitful session you had this morning. Thanks for all the work you have done on local level, at the national level. And I would stress a couple of things which came up to my mind while I have listened to your debate. First of all, I think, and this is what Joris mentioned as one of his last points, what are the legal basics for all those what we are doing? And we're having certainly made some progress over the last years, especially if we are looking back 10 years after Rana Plaza, that the trade unions, but also companies are much more engaged, and we have reached a couple of framework agreements with industry or with other international trade unions confederation. This, I think, is an important aspect. An important aspect are also other legal bases as the OECD guidelines, but especially, I think, which is the core, are the ILO core labor standards. And this is extremely relevant if we come to the issues we are talking about, as Jennifer has asked at the beginning. And what I have heard from you is that one of the core problems is the recognition of trade unions. So long as trade unions are not recognized, I think it's very difficult, very hard that workers in the different sectors being able to defend or to make use of their rights based on the national labor legislation and so on and so forth. So the recognition of trade unions, I think, is still one of the key issues, but also quite important is the whole issue of health and safety. Health and safety is really one of the core problems, that workers become ill, they can't work, then they have no social security nets. So this is something which is, from a trade union perspective and then as an ambassador for decent work, very, very crucial. But also payments, wages, and the basis for good wages are always collective agreements. And here we are coming back to the rights of trade unions, that trade unions are recognized. So if I don't have a recognition of trade unions, I can't have collective agreements, which covers much more than only wages, covering also working conditions, working time issues, which are crucial for decent work. And a second aspect, I think, if it comes also to effective grievance mechanism, is that we have good contacts with the local stakeholders. And one of the first issue is how we make sure that at the local level, people are aware of certain agreements, international law, or whatever. So without knowledge about the possibilities and opportunities, they can't make use of it. So this is something, I think, which is extremely important, what we are calling capacity building at the local level, at the plant level, that to make it possible that people are aware of their rights and of their possibilities. And the last point, which has been mentioned by Joris, and I'm very pleased that at least in Germany, from 1st of January this year, we have a specific law, the due diligence law, which gives specific responsibilities to big companies in Germany. We have a threshold for the time being of, I think, 3,000 employees in a company. And we are hopefully close to finish the debate on the European piece of law on due diligence, which is much more important than having only a national law, because we have something similar in France, in some other countries. But if we are acting together, at least at the European level, such a European due diligence law could really improve the situation. But here again, the work has to start to make people knowledgeable about those legal frameworks which can improve their situation. And therefore, I think also the exchange of experiences, monitoring are important issues which you have mentioned. And there's a lot of work to do, but I think we have made some progress. And with all your engagement, I think it's wonderful to see that we are working together, we can have an impact.
Thank you so much, Rainer Hoffmann. That was a wonderful overview of the things that really underpin successful worker voice systems and worker inclusive grievance mechanisms. Thank you so much for that. Now we reach the second half of our session, in which we want to interact directly with you about the issues raised. We want to use these breakout groups as a chance for a bit of a deep dive into some of the issues that we've discussed, and also to gather some more input from you about how to make this real at a very practical level. So please bring your experiences, your insights, your questions too. Questions are always good. I notice some questions have appeared about safeguarding, which I hope will be raised in the breakout groups, because this is such an important and fundamental issue, and Emma raised that in quite early on in the panel discussion. So it'd be good if we could look at that some more. Okay, so we've got 2 breakout groups for you, and I understand that you'll be able to choose. Breakout room 1 is going to be focusing on how multi-stakeholder designed and operated grievance mechanisms, how multi-stakeholder mechanisms in particular can move towards more worker-driven formats and approaches. And that is going to be facilitated by Fairware, PST and Accord. Breakout room 2 is going to be focusing on what kinds of features the garment industry need to put into their grievance mechanisms to make sure that workers actually benefit from these kinds of mechanisms, and that they actually have impact in terms of positive human rights outcomes. And this is going to be facilitated by CNV International, Clean Clothes Campaign, and our friends from KSBSI. So now I'm hoping that the tech team will do their magic, and you'll be able to choose your room, and I'll see you back here in about 30 minutes. Fantastic. Great.
Hey, everyone.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm so glad you all found your way back to me. That's wonderful. I hope you had a good and productive discussion in your breakout groups, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the summaries of those discussions now. So yes, let's hear from the breakout group moderators about how those discussions went and what was learned. Can I start with the Fairware and PST team from breakout group 1?
I'm just trying to collect myself with this.
Yes, I know. I know.
I'll try. Yes.
Good luck.
Of course. Yeah. Hi. Good to meet you. I haven't introduced myself, but yeah, my name is Lara. I'm working for the German Partnership for Sustainable Textiles, and happy to be here as well. And I'm just going to quickly summarize what we discussed, or we decided through a Mentimeter questionnaire and able to gather as much input as possible in these 30 minutes, which were gone by like a minute. So one question that we asked was, what do you understand by meaningful stakeholder engagement? Something that the Accountability and Remedy project is using as a term, which is very abstract, and we wanted to gather some ideas what this actually means. And there were a lot of different points or ideas, but I think the common ground is that there needs to be authentic trust building, trustworthy engagement, and not just one-time ad hoc engagement, but really a long process where stakeholders, especially local stakeholders, have a seat at the table and actively co-create these kind of mechanisms that we are implementing to benefit workers on the ground. Terms were mentioned like fairness, equal level of communication, to also make communication possible, to remove barriers to engagement, such as, for example, language barriers. How can we make sure that the local level can be integrated into these discussions and to overcome these barriers? There was also like this, what I also mentioned already, with the seat at the table to eradicate this power imbalance, to create more a discussion based on equalness, and to also share responsibility between brands and factories, and us as MSI seeing it a bit more as a bridge between local stakeholders and brands, and mediating these discussions. This was a bit on what I would say is the summary for our first question, but I'm also happy to hear if someone wants to add to this. Another question that we asked, we didn't have so much time to discuss it in the end, but as you know, as Valentin mentioned in the beginning, is that we MSIs such as Fairware, PST, Amfori, Accord, ACT, FLA, ETI, and so on, we have been coming together on a regular basis to discuss challenges and best practices within the topic of grievance mechanism. And we also want to bring this to a next level to really look into, okay, how can concrete collaboration look like And we asked, what benefits and challenges do you anticipate in a joint overall grievance system for workers as we're looking into this in the near future? How can this fragmented system of different mechanisms be integrated? And we see that we know that there will be challenges that we have to address, but also there will be maybe a chance to join forces. There was one message within the Mentimeters, like organizations like ACT, SAC, Fairware, Amphori, Accord should be able to join forces on good grievance systems which gain trust at all stakeholders. I think this is a message that we received and want to implement. But of course, there are also challenges as we need to be careful that we are not reducing standards when coming together. We have to find a very good common ground, not just minimum ground, but really going above, align as best as possible. I would keep it at that. Maybe Valentin or anyone else from our session want to add to this. But I think we have quite an endeavor to take as MSIs.
Thank you. That was really interesting, and I'm particularly pleased that you dug so deep into what is meaningful stakeholder engagement part, because this is something that just about everyone struggles with. Partly because there are resources limitations to all of this, but also I appreciated your reference, you highlighting the fact that this is a continuous thing, and there are structural things that you can do to make sure that it is a continuous thing, not a one-off thing. Also,
and let me add one thing, Jennifer, that I forgot. Sorry, there was also one comment saying that there's insufficient analysis done of the thousands of complaints received in terms of understanding the adverse impacts and developing strategies for prevention. I think earlier on there was also a question of whether the ILO or any other body could provide best practice examples, how complaints could be dealt at local level, but also international level, how these levels could interact. And I think this is something that we actually should take up to really look into what do cases actually look like and provide best practice examples, especially when it comes to remedy. It's not just about setting up the grievance mechanism, but actually looking into how remedy can be provided, what different forms of remedy are there, and what has worked well and what has not worked well in order to provide timely remediation.
Yeah, indeed. That sounds like a really interesting idea. The other thing that struck me about you were also starting to dig into the dilemmas about, there are benefits of coordination, cooperation, harmonization, but then you can risk losing something. So how you get that balance exactly right. There's some difficult calls there, but sounds like you had a really interesting discussion. Unless Valentin or any of the other moderators want to raise their hand and add anything. No,
I think I will leave it at that, Jennifer.
All right, okay.
Time as well for the other breakout room.
All right, okay.
Yeah,
let's let's go over to breakout room 2, which I sat in on. Let's hear from Suzanne from CNVI.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it was quite challenging, I must say, to have such a large breakout session with more than 70 participants and 55 chat messages. So I've been trying to grasp everything that has been said, but I just want to make sure to say that we will make a report of the webinar and also take into account all of the useful suggestions that were made. I think in our plenary, in our breakout session, we addressed really the question of how do we make grievance mechanisms more worker-centered. And I think some of the things that were said at the beginning of the breakout session was really to echo what was already addressed by the panel during the plenary session we had earlier. So building trust, awareness raising about grievance mechanisms and making sure that workers can actually get involved, But then the question was also asked, but who is responsible for this awareness raising? And I think that's a crucial question. Like, is it the labor unions that is responsible? Is it the factory management that is responsible? If the factory management is responsible, will they reflect well what are the rights and what is at stake? So I think this is something indeed that we should feel a joint responsibility, I think, from the NGO labor unions perspective, but also from the brands and factory management perspectives, and also maybe see how we can coordinate more on this joint responsibility in terms of awareness raising. Another topic that was echoed was having binding regulations and mechanisms, monitoring it well and evaluating to see whether it's actually effective. Local language was something that was mentioned, but also timing of the meetings, where oftentimes it's also difficult for workers to be able to join meetings when their rights are being discussed, or when they can address grievances. The meetings might be outside of working hours, while 80% of the workers in the garment industry is female, so they have often children that they have to take out of daycare and have their household responsibilities as well. So it's very challenging for them to participate in any meetings outside of their work. But also, if it concerns a particular grievance that is at stake, often traveling is involved. Then it's a matter of financial resources that also makes it challenging for workers to be involved in the process. Emma from Clean Clothes Campaign also addressed what their outside of the box, if I may call it that way, idea of establishing a fund where, in terms of, for instance, severance pay, companies would already have take their responsibility beforehand, and it would also make possible to have a solution much more faster than through the lengthy grievance mechanisms. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm sure Emma can provide also a link in the chat to have a look. Just looking at. Oh yeah, and then there was one more comment also in terms of what we're talking about. Like we're talking about complaints, we're talking about grievances. When is it a complaint? When is it a grievance? I think this also has to do with capacity building and making our language maybe a bit more explicit and clear, especially if we need the local organizations and workers to be involved. And we discussed also digital tools. Because of course there's local labor unions that you can ask for help in awareness raising or gathering information. They can make use of digital tools. CNV International ourselves, we work with a digital tool to gather information from workers. But it's also an opportunity, if there's no representation on the ground, to still see how you can use digital tools to get a worker's perspective. I think that's pretty much what was addressed in our breakout session. If there's anyone who thinks I missed something, please do raise your hands, but I think it's put it up quite well.
I thought that was a brilliant summary. You had a really good dig around the some of these difficult accessibility points, particularly from the perspective of worker voice and worker perspectives. I thought that was fascinating. And yes, the discussion around technologies and using technologies to overcome some of the really fundamental challenges around engagement is a really fascinating one and an ongoing one. So yeah, thank you. I saw lots of suggestions flying in through the chat box as you were going. So you have a lot of material to take home. Do any of the other moderators want to chip in quickly with anything further
Can I add something? Yeah, just 1 minute.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Ellie. Hi.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I think it is also good we establish joint agreement inside the company as we establish about the issue of GBV. So many company here who produce in garment also, we have joint agreement, even though in international level already agree as the convention, but we need to binding it inside the company. We succeed. More than 12 company already established the joint agreement inside the company. So how do you think when even though initiative in international level, but we need joint training, including management and also workers. So there is no like differentiation between us because we sitting together, we talking, we discuss about everything, we're facing all of us, workers and also management. So I think it is only, it is also can establish here in Indonesia first. I will talk to our federation to make it, and then maybe CNV will sometime guide us how the development about this process, yeah? Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jennifer, I'm not hearing you at the moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Someone had to do it, and it was most likely to be me. Yes, I just wanted to say thanks. Yes.
Jennifer, one thing again.
Yes, go on.
Yeah, one very big treatment to the workers. Sometimes companies say tomorrow will be closed because there is no order. It is not possible. Can we asking to the people or brand outside that they should be make notification 6 months before reduce or close the order, so the workers have time to fight for their right and also to seeking a new job for them.
Yeah. Okay.
Instead of suddenly close the company and then they have no severance pay.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. No, that's a really practical, real life point. Thank you. Yes, I was just saying when I muted myself accidentally that these legal issues, these legal underpinnings keep coming up as an issue. Joris raised it in the panel, and Rainer Hoffman picked it up in his session. So I think there's a possible future session for you there, Lara, on on legal underpinnings and structures, also how contractual issues relate to legal regimes. Lots of interesting issues to explore. So thank you so much, Ellie, for that. And as we're at the top of the hour, or actually past the top of the hour, I will just close us out to say thank you so much. I mean, this discussion has been such a valuable opportunity for exploring what's special about worker organizations and trade unions, what they can uniquely and distinctively contribute to supply chain grievance mechanisms, and as we've been discussing, that role is multifaceted. I think we all view the growth of worker voice and worker driven approaches as a really significant, really important, and really positive new development. If we're going to move from the current situation, which is sort of in some ways tending towards some chaos and incoherence, into something that's much more useful for workers, those organizations are absolutely key. So just back to basics. Supply chain grievance mechanisms, designers and developers of these mechanisms must work constructively with worker representatives and trade unions if they want those mechanisms to be effective. They are essential partners in the development of grievance mechanisms. Moreover, worker organizations and trade unions are also essential partners in the work that we're now engaged in, which is really just getting underway, but which is rapidly gathering momentum to try to find a way of linking mechanisms together more effectively so that people have options. If something doesn't work here, if something's not feasible or right for them, then the route to a remedy isn't barred. There are other possibilities. Okay, I'll close it out there. On behalf of the organisers of this session, I'd like to send a very special thank you to our excellent speakers today and facilitators, Valentine, Suzanne, Ellie, Emma, Joris, Rainer Hoffman, and of course our technical team. Thank you so much to the facilitators of the breakout sessions. You did a terrific job. And a huge thank you to you, all of our participants in this side event, particularly those of you who have stayed up late. You've given us so much to reflect on, and we are so grateful. So all that remains for me to say is please keep in touch, and to wish you all a pleasant afternoon, evening. Goodbye.